right, we're going to stray away from MMA. We're going to talk about some MMA fighters that are going to get down in the squared circle. So for the past week or so, the original BMFs, Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal, they've flown all around the country promoting their upcoming boxing match in early June. MMA Junkie was present at multiple press conferences, and we'll get to more on that in just a second. But look, Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal, that fight in MMA was pretty good. I really, really enjoyed it. Their next fight will take place in the squared circle, a whole different other sport. There is no UFC here to promote. There is no Dana White to let you know what's up. They have to do the heavy lifting. What are your guys' thoughts on the media tour? Was it successful? What's your level of interest, Goes?
Level of interest has gone up a little bit. With these media tours, what tends to happen in boxing is you want your first one to be big and your last one to be big. The ones in the middle don't usually count for very much. With two guys here, it's a little strange because, these are two crazy guys, man. Like, you don't want it to go too far because they'll go to the point where you can't have the fight. You're dealing with two very, very strong personalities, but they have to keep it fresh. They're fighting for everyone's attention, right? And there's so many options of what to watch on your television, especially now if you're into other sports with hockey and basketball playoffs heating up. To me, I think at times it popped and at times it fell a little flat. When it fell a little flat, I have to put some of the blame, maybe a little bit more of it, more on Nate Diaz, because at the end of the day, Jorge Masvidal has already kind of proven that he's the better fighter. We saw them fight already. He won and he beat him soundly. In my opinion, it's up to Nate Diaz to sell us on this fight. He's the one that has to come out of his shell, and he's the one that has to tell us why this fight is going to be different, why we need to pay all that money to watch this fight again. What is going to be different? What are you going to do in this fight that's going to be different from the first time? We need a reason to tune in, and I think that falls more on his side than it does Jorge Masvidal, because Jorge Masvidal has already proven he's able to beat him. So I think Nate needed to liven up a little bit, and maybe get in his face. I get that things can get a little heated if you put them too close, but I mean, they were like a couple yards apart when they were doing the stare downs at times. So it was like a roller coaster, George, to answer your question.
Yeah, those face-offs were kind of duds, to tell you the truth. Look at Forrest Daniels in the chat room. He says, can't wait to see Masvidal versus Diaz in boxing. Said no one ever. And then he also says, even Nate Diaz doesn't care about this fight. And you're right. He gives off that vibe. He kind of did it in the Jake Paul fight. He didn't realize, holy crap, I'm kind of the promoter and the boxer. So I think he almost shortchanges himself. But listen, like I mentioned before, MMA Junkie was present multiple times during this boxing press conference tour in Las Vegas at stop number 1. Mike Bond caught up with the 209's very own Nate Diaz. They also talked some MMA. Here's that clip.
Is there any type of pipe dream that we could ever get to?
I have 100% guarantee I'm going to fight Conor McGregor again. And I have 100% guarantee I'm going to probably fight Jake Paul again, this fucking fucker again, and Leon Edwards again. That's my hit list.
Would you like to fight Conor in the Sphere?
206, right? Yeah, that's my plan. It's something like that.
I imagine you meant 306, which is at the Sphere in Las Vegas. Danny Segura, what are your thoughts, man? Actually, let me go to Dan on this one. Dan, what are your thoughts? Do you think this is likely to happen? We'll focus on Nate versus Conor. I know you mentioned the hit list, but what do you think of that fight?
I mean, it depends. You got to see on results. And as much as I'm a big, Diaz brother and 209 fan, I love that whole crew and all whatnot. But, Nate, toward the end of his career, let's not forget, he's kind of gotten a little Tito Ortiz-like in the sense of, everyone give Tito crap for all the excuses after a fight. Like, I had a cracked skull. I got a separated L9, LC, L9. And with Nate, after every fight, he's always like, yeah, I didn't even fucking, I didn't spar. I just tried to help Chris Avila, and I don't know. And so I'm like, what's the excuse going to be for this one? It's like, is it going to be like, Masvidal just had too much swag with his shirts and sweaters. It's not fair. From the outset, let me ask you, what state is this in? Sorry, those clips were from Mike Bond's interview. We weren't able to include those, but yeah, I'm curious because I gotta favor Masvidal in this. I know Masvidal kind of had his little freshman 15 post career blow up, but he looks like he's back down in shape. And, this is boxing. So there's going to be, tighter rounds, which is going to be less time for, the Diaz brothers style to kind of drown somebody, right? There's going to be those constant resets. So I don't know. I think Masvidal is going to be a big enough challenge for Nate to get by first, let's just say.
Josh Wallace in the chat says they don't get down. They get down. They don't really talk. Well, I don't know. They used to talk a lot more in the past. Joseph Boza says it wouldn't happen at the Sphere. That's the rumored date for our coaches fight with Alexa and Valentina. Well, we've seen the ladies before step aside and co-main for, males in the past. I mean, you might be right, Joseph, but I think it could definitely still happen. In fact, I know Valentina for sure has been a bridesmaid, we'll say, at some of the events where she's defended the title. But all right, I like that, Dan. Great job there with the impersonations. But when the stop headed to the 305, Danny Segura and his backpack survived the chaotic scene, and he caught up with Game Bread, where they also talked some MMA. Here's that clip.
What does this fight mean in the grand scheme of things? You said you had 3 fights in boxing. You're going to start this one with Nate Diaz. What is the rest of your, boxing career look like? What are you trying to do in this stage of your career?
I'm trying to get some big-ass checks, you know what I'm saying? Break some fucking necks, I wouldn't mind taking on Logan Paul and rearranging his face. He's a hell of a fighter with the boxing from when he comes from being an influencer. He did some good things against Mayweather, but I think I can end that dude, man. I'd like to fight Logan. If I get my hands on Mayweather, Pacquiao down the road, any of these guys, other guys I'd like to fight, and definitely going to come back to UFC and give a W for my city, for my family, my kids, for everybody who believes in me. I got to go back to UFC.
Danny, I don't know if you're like me, but that Mayweather Pacquiao stuff went in one ear and out the other. I just zeroed in on the fact that he very much wants to return to the UFC. Doesn't like the way things finished there. What did you grasp from it? You were up close. You were the one leading the questioning there.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. Like, if Jorge Masvidal ends up fighting Logan Paul or Mayweather or Pacquiao, sure, there'll be some interest there. There'll be some headlines, but I don't think it changes or it means much for the combat sports landscape. Now, if he were to return to the UFC, I think there's something there. Look, I was there present for Jorge Masvidal's retirement fight in Miami when he fought Gilbert Burns, and he put on a good fight. Yeah, he did lose, but Burns at the time was one of the best 5 fighters in the world, and I still think he's probably up there still. I don't think Masvidal is no longer a top 5 or even a top 10, but probably more likely between 15 and 20, and that's still a pretty damn good range to consider, considering that 170 pounds is a really stacked division. I didn't think he looked bad. His chin was there. It's not like he was leaving on a bad losing streak with knockouts. I do think there's something there for money fights. I've always been a big proponent for the Conor McGregor fight. Look, Nate Diaz is a free agent. If he doesn't want to get tied down again with the UFC, Jorge Masvidal is. So that could be an option. I don't know, man. I just think that Jorge Masvidal has a little bit more left to give in mixed martial arts when it comes down to money fights. I'd love to see him against a Conor McGregor, I don't know, a Bobby Green. There's so many names that pop up that I think would be very interesting for him. So those comments were very interesting. And look, Jorge Masvidal has been training in Las Vegas with Jorge Capetillo, who is the person responsible for bringing Brandon Moreno's boxing to the level that we saw now. And he's been taking this very, very seriously. And towards the end of his MMA career, you would hear rumblings that maybe he wouldn't be training as hard. But once you get a focused Jorge Masvidal, I still think he can be a danger in the UFC's welterweight division. So I'm excited, and I hope to see him again in the UFC. I think there's some big fights there left for him.
Danny, you know how we always talk about all McGregor needs is one big win. He might fight for the title. Well, they used to say that Masvidal, when he left, was the number 2 pay-per-view guy, or maybe even number 1 while McGregor was gone. So I got a question for you. If he were to come back and get one more win, 5 words, 3-piece and a soda, is there maybe come to the front of the line, Mr. Masvidal, against
No,
Leon
I don't think
Edwards?
so, because that 170 division is so stacked, right? Like Ian Gary's killing it, Shafkat's killing it, Bilal Muhammad's
killing it, and he can't get a shot.
I know, but I'm saying like it'd be one thing to skip one guy over, but in this situation, he would be skipping over like 4 or 5 guys that deserve the shot. But I'll say this: if he gets paired up against Shafkat or Bilal Muhammad, we still don't know who he's gonna fight. Man, those are tough fights for Leon Edwards. And not that I don't believe in Leon Edwards, but it'd be tough for anybody to beat those two guys. So I think he's probably bound to catch an L at some point with either of those guys. And if he does, coming off a loss, maybe a Masvidal fight does make sense, and that would be interesting. Go do it in London. Go back to the scene where that whole thing happened. There's a storyline there. I think that fight, a lot of people would see it as a wash for Leon Edwards, that he would just run over Masvidal. But I think given the styles that it's, striking, I think it could be entertaining. I think it could be a thing. So I like that idea, but I think it happens in a non-title fight version of it.
All right, I can see Dan Tom standing on the side like one of the little girls when they're doing the double dutch. He's ready to jump in. What you got to say, Dan?
No, that's a sneaky, clever timeline, and I could see that working. Although, in order for that to work, we actually have to have a welterweight title fight finally put on the books. I know Bilal Muhammad's been waiting for that for some time, right? But I'll say this. Give him veteran fights, and not to interject any more BMF talk into it, but this is a BMF worthy matchup, a veteran, a sensible matchup. Give him Matt Brown for his first fight back in the UFC. Matt Brown versus Jorge Masvidal.
I'm in.
And that's
a great idea, Dan.
That could still set him up for taxiing, for Danny's timeline to still fall into play. Like, both could work too. You never know. It's just a great fight to come back to. Throw that on a pay-per-view. Easy.
Oh yeah.
Protoss Hydraulisk, I think something like that, says people are still doubting Leon.
Hey, I'm not doubting Leon.
No.
Put anybody in there. Put Ian Gary. Put Bilal Muhammad to fight Shafkat and Leon. Like, they're so good that it's just hard to see anybody beat both, get past both those guys. So it's not against Leon. It's just that division is so competitive. But take the Leon Edwards name out there. Put in Ian Gary. Put in whoever you want. Getting past Bilal Muhammad and Shafkat back-to-back is going to be a difficult task for anybody. And I think anyone is probably going to catch an L to either of those guys. So no disrespect to the champion. I believe in him. It's just the way it is.
And
I think
gotten
this
better and better and better for sure. Go ahead, Goes.
I think this cluster that we just covered in this topic, it's so important for so many reasons, right? For like the landscape of MMA, if you're one of these fighters that's trying to get away from the UFC and prove that money can be made outside of it, you need Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal to generate money. You need them to sell well. Nate Diaz made a good paycheck with Jake Paul, right? If he can make another one, maybe he doesn't want to go back to the UFC. Maybe he realizes, hey, I can make money here. Jorge Masvidal, probably the same thing. But I think a lot of this has to tie into Conor McGregor winning. If Conor McGregor wins, I don't think we're ever going to talk about Nate Diaz ever again, that fight. That is his get out of jail card, right? If Conor McGregor goes out, gets starched by Michael Chandler, depending on what his contract situation is with the UFC, that's when you pull that Nate Diaz card and you say, I want to fight this guy. We have something to settle, even though it was 2016, I think, last time they fought. Because when it comes to that fight, records don't really matter, right? A Jorge Masvidal, if things don't work out for him here in this boxing fight and he does want to go back to the UFC, again, if Conor McGregor loses, that Danny has always called for that fight. I've always loved that fight. Like George said, maybe possibly 1 and 2 as far as pay-per-view sales. Why not make that fight? That would be a lot of fun. That would be incredible. There's so many different angles that you can do, but I think people really need to pay attention to what could possibly happen with just a few moves here and there on the chessboard, how this can affect our sport and the future of the UFC.
Yeah, great point by Goes. I do think the result of the boxing match between Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal could have big ripple effects in the MMA world. Completely different sport, but these guys are just so big and they're tied to so many people that are also big that I feel like whoever wins here it could have a lot of leverage returning back to mixed martial arts.
Dan, what's your early lean on this boxing match between Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal?
Yeah, man, I gotta go with Masvidal, not just because of the swag, like Nate was saying earlier on our live cast here, but it's the matchup. I did pick him as far as MMA goes, and in boxing, I actually kind of like it better because you get the upset submission out of the equation from the Diaz situation, and again the round limits. Even if Masvidal wasn't taking this as seriously, and Diaz was taking it perhaps more seriously than we suspect, I still believe that the round frames and timing favors Masvidal.